And thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Buckchester. You know what I like to do on my show? I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today I am speaking with a fired up author. His name is Ronald Hera, and his book is Bethlehem's Brothers. Now, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Ronald. Thank you so much for being on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Thank you, Dr. Chester. Glad to be here and excited.
I am excited to have you on as well. Now, before we start talking about your book, I always take the beginning few minutes of the show to introduce you to perhaps a few people who are unfamiliar with you or unfamiliar with your work. So if you can, please, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What makes Ronald Hera Ronald Hera?
Well, one of the things that makes me who I am is for 10 years I worked as a director of development for Ghana Christian Mission in Ghana, Africa, and that influenced me a lot. I grew up in Indiana and lived just about 7 miles away from where I grew up. So I'm pretty much a stay local kind of guy, but yet in my job I traveled all over the world and met all kinds of Christians from different places like India and a place almost everywhere in Europe. And that was part of what changed my way of thinking. And I like to speak to people and talk to people. So being a director of development was fine with me. And I traveled all over the United States. But one of the things that I kind of found out was, people know what Christianity is today, but they don't know what it was like in the first century. They know about Jesus, but what about the people? And that was one of the things that kind of inspired me to write the book.
Absolutely. You are so right about that. If you don't watch one of the movies, you are unaware, and sometimes the movie isn't actually factual when it comes to the people. They're just kind of the extras, if you will. They're focused on Jesus, but not on the culture of the people. You are so right about that, and we do need to have that context. Now, some people are familiar with the name Gideon. However, they may not be familiar with the association. You are a member of the Gideons International. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, what I am is the area team director, and the area that I am the team director for is Indianapolis and the surrounding counties. And the Gideons is an interesting organization. There's 127,000 Gideons all over the world. It's very international, and we've handed out more than 1 billion Bibles to different places. Yeah. And people are aware that they're in hotel rooms and things like that. But what they don't know about is how we reach out to young people, school age, college age, the first responders, the military, the doctors and dentists' offices and that kind of thing. But we do more than place Bibles. We teach people how to be leaders. And that's one of the neat things, because people go to church and that kind of thing, but do they really go out and tell about the gospel and meet people and interact with people who aren't Christians? Probably not, to be very honest with you. And so the Gideons enables us to do that in a way that is unique.
And thank you for letting people know that it is more than just the Bibles that are placed in the hotel rooms, because I don't think that people know that. They think that that's kind of, even though that is an awesome idea and such a beautiful thing, because I've heard many a story about how that simple placement of a Bible actually saved someone's life. So in that they were right there at the edge, and they opened that drawer and they saw that Bible and said, if this is what I think it is, I'm not going to do what I'm planning on doing. And it was. So you guys are amazing, and you do such important work. And thank you for stepping into that leadership position and helping to be a voice in our community. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Now, being an author, is that something that you always wanted to do, or did you find that was just the next logical step for you along your life journey?
Well, I think it's a logical step along my life journey. As a manager of engineering, I wrote technical papers and that kind of thing, some of which won, awards. But the writing was something that I enjoyed, and I liked research. I liked to learn history. And so what I did was I kind of combined my love of history, my love of the Bible and the people in the Bible and the interesting characters. I combined that with my desire to research and to write. I didn't want to lose the writing capability once I retired.
Yes, it's quite important. I can understand that. That is true. As they say, if you don't use it, you lose it. And boy, do we forget to do things or how to do things properly if we don't practice, if we don't continue to use it. That is important. Now, your book, Bethlehem's Brothers. I like the title. It's quite interesting. You think you know what you're going to learn, but perhaps you don't. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you come about the title?
Well, it's an action drama, and I wanted to reach people that would read, something that is really interesting and not just not a documentary or some boring thing like that. What I wanted them to see is the life of the people at the time, and I have two protagonists, and the reason I did that is that you could show both sides. One brother is not so sure, that Christ is really the Messiah. And if he is, he wants him to be a fighter and a conqueror. The other one goes to him, and he actually is healed by him. And so, he knows this is the real thing. So the brothers have this conflict of interest, and it resolves itself at the end of Bethlehem's Brothers. But there are two more books that cover these same two guys, and it takes you all the way to 70 A.D. when Jerusalem is destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Now, what led you to write the book about the first century in Palestine?
Well, that was, of course, when Christ was there, but that was what I was interested in for research. I wanted to learn about, what it was like to be a third world country, so to speak, conquered by the Romans. And then you had the conflict. The Christians were thought of by the Romans as just another part of Judaism. And they had all kinds of misconceptions about the Christians. For instance, they thought they ate and drank the blood of a dead man, which to them was just totally crazy. And then the conflict with the Jews at the time was, of course, that anyone who believed in Christ was just crazy, and so they didn't want to accept any of it. And so those who did accept it were outcasts. So you had the Romans on the top, the Jewish leaders. Below them was the Jewish people, of course. And at the very bottom of the heap were the new Christians. And sometimes they lost their businesses, all kinds of things. And it's in the book. If you believed in Christ, sometimes they would just not go to your shop anymore. So, they had a really hard time that first century.
You are so right, and it's funny that you mentioned that part. That's something that my friends and I were discussing one day, and it says, we can understand how they thought that perhaps cannibalism was being introduced. We take it for granted because we understand that it's a concept of this wine is my blood and this bread is my flesh. But when you're in it, when there's no precursor, it's like the first time you ever hear it, you do say, "You want me to do what now?" So I can understand how they were like, "Wait a minute, I was with you up until that point. Explain it to me one more time what we're doing with this wine and bread." So yeah, that is just true. I love it. I love it. It is almost time for us to go to break, but before we do, Ronald, if you could please remind everyone, what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
The name of the book, it's Bethlehem's Brothers, and it's available on Amazon.com, pageturner.us. You can get it at Barnes & Noble and large bookstores like that. And to contact me, you can contact me on Facebook. It's Ronald Hera, Hera, Books. And that's my Facebook page.
Alrighty, everyone, now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer? Get us to open up, even push us further? It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for your sponsor, Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. My guest today is Ronald Hera, and we're talking about his book, Bethlehem's Brothers. And it is a series of books, and I can't wait to keep talking to him about such a concept. Now, Ronald, my next question for you is do you intend to continue writing now that the Brothers series lives in Enoch and Simon? What's your intention with the series?
Well, my intention is to cover their whole lifetime. And it begins with the children being killed in Bethlehem. And these two boys become orphans, basically. And they go different directions. One is raised by a zealot uncle, and the other one is raised by a potter who used to be a rabbi in the local synagogue. And so what they do is they live this life, but they go through all the way from the time of that the children are killed until Christ arrives, and that's the first book. The second book takes you from the time that right after Christ was crucified, and Paul shows up, and Matthew's writing his book, and those kind of things. So we meet those people, and we also meet the persecution. Paul persecuted. So the second book is a lot about that. And then the third book, oddly enough, takes you into Jerusalem when the Romans want to go into Jerusalem and destroy it. And so Enoch, the one that was raised by a zealot, is with the zealots who are in Jerusalem, and he says, open the gates and the Romans will spare you. And then Simeon is with the Romans, and he says to the Romans, if the gates are open, don't destroy the city and the temple. Of course, they lose. But that's their lifetime. yeah, it's kind of interesting. You'd think that I would end with some great victory, but no, that's not the way it goes.
Now, why for so many people, they have a particular Bible verse that really inspires them or motivates them to keep going, or that they're trying to convey a particular message when using Scripture. Why did you reference Bible verses in Bethlehem's Brothers? Why was it important in your mind to do that?
Well, I think it is because let's say you're kind of a believer, but you're not really into it. Well, when you read about an incident that is happening or some kind of encounter with Christ, I show that what I'm saying is consistent with the Bible. And if they want to check it, they'll go back and check it. That gets them in the Bible, which is a good thing, for them to do that. So that's one of the reasons I put it in. The other is that these are real events that I'm talking about. The destruction of Jerusalem and all these things, they're real events. I mean, it's historical fiction is what it is. And the reason it's fiction is the characters are fictional, not the events.
Okay. So thanks for clearing that up. Now, for someone, so just to be sure, or for the person who may have a question about that, do you have to be a Christian in order to understand and fully get what's going on with your book, or can you just be, the average guy and gal who may or may not be interested in religion, but they still want to read a good book? Where does your book fall in?
Well, it falls into action drama, and the action that goes on is with the Romans trying to kill the Zealots and the boy Enoch being with the Zealots. In fact, I have a great chase scene in there where the Romans almost get him. And I have chase scenes in there. I have drama like, for instance, the man who raised Simeon, who was the potter and the rabbi, he dies suddenly, and as you're reading through the book, you say, oh my gosh, we've lost Thomas, those kind of things. And so it really is interesting. It's about people and their lives. And so anybody who's interested in people, their lives, conflict, my goodness, the conflict there far outweighs the conflict that's going on now in our country. But you can relate a little bit to it. There's the big guy and there's the little guy, and there's the believer and the unbeliever. So if you're an unbeliever, you say, Enoch's right. That's what you should be looking for. And if you're a believer, you're saying, well, no wonder Simeon's a believer. Christ healed him. So, it's pretty exciting from the standpoint of following these brothers in their lives, because their lives were exciting. And the people they were with, some of them were pretty exciting people, like Paul, so there's exciting characters in there.
I have often told people, it's like, okay, if you actually read the Bible and you really kind of get going, and let's be honest, there are some parts that perhaps we want to skip over, like when they're going through the genealogy.
Sure.
But when you get to some of the stories, like you said, it is packed full of good stuff. You just have to read it. And I think that for so many people, that's part of the hindrance as well, is that they don't want to read it. They don't want to read.
Well,
they would rather watch the movie. But when you point out the good stuff, like you said, you have those OMG moments. It pulls you in, and you want to continue to read.
Right. I have one guy that is a reader of mine, and he called me up and he said, I have never read ever. And he's like 55. He says, I have never read a book from start to finish in one sitting. But he said, I read Bethlehem's Brothers in one sitting. I couldn't put it down. And that's what I like to hear.
Absolutely. Good job with that. Because who doesn't want someone to be fired up about reading their book? You know, that is
Yeah.
amazing. I'm so glad. I'm glad that you enjoyed it too. And I hope that, and listeners, you guys know that I'm the type of person that I leave reviews, and especially if I enjoyed something, I want to make sure that that author knows that I enjoyed their book, because that's their
Yes.
baby. They spent a long time, you know, pouring into that project. So make sure that you go to wherever your favorite spot is and you leave that 5-star review for that author, just like that guy did, you know, and you let them know that you are enjoying their book. Now, do you have speaking of your baby, with Bethlehem's brother, do you have a particular part of the book that is your favorite? I know we try not to do that with our children and say, you know, I like this boy over that boy, or this is my favorite gal. But do you have a favorite part of the book?
I do actually, and it's a chase scene, and the Romans show up, and they show up at the home of the man who is raising Enoch, and they come down the hill and they're going to destroy him. And so Enoch is there, his mother is with him, and one of the fishermen named Nathan is with him. Well, they run down the hill and they have their swords drawn and everything. Nathan sees them coming, so he goes up to where Esther, the mother, is. He knocks out the zealot brother, knocks him clear out, runs back, he grabs Esther, runs down the hill, and puts her in a boat, because he's a fisherman, and he pushes the boat out. So she's somewhere where the Romans can't get her. He's not. So yeah, and she's in there with some other fishermen. So he goes somewhere to a hut, and inside the hut there's a trap. The zealots had set it all up if the Romans would show up at their hut, and he knows that. So he goes in. The couple Romans are chasing him. He goes in. He goes in the hut, but he kicks out a board in the back of it so he can escape while they're coming in the front. Then he pulls a cord, and the fishing nets fall on the Romans. So then he can go back, and he slits their throat. Obviously, it's violent.
Wow.
And so then yeah, I know. So then he runs down a hill to a certain place that he already figured out with his guys. They come with the boat and Esther and pick him up. And so he escapes from the Romans, and the Romans, they were after him and his whole crew, you know. So then they get away, and, you know, then you go on with the story. But to me, that's kind of an exciting little tidbit in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, they had to survive.
Yeah. And if you have a great imagination, if you're able to follow along, and sometimes I tell people, you know, if you say, well, I don't have a great imagination, read it, pause for a minute, really think about what you just read. Read it again and try to play the movie in your head. You know, see what the author is telling you. And if you imagine that, it's like, what? And like you said, you know, you have those moments where you're like, oh my goodness, did that just happen? And it ends up being a really great book. I happen to love reading. So maybe I'm not the person to talk about that, but I think that you have painted an awesome picture there of that scene, and it really gets you going. Now, for someone who says, I'm all in, I want to get a copy of the book, it sounds amazing. How do you suggest that a person read it? Is it like a cover to cover? There are no chapters, just simply keep reading to page next? Are there chapters? Should someone just read chapter to chapter? What are your suggestions?
Oh, you can read chapter to chapter with no problem. What I do is, as you go through, you know, you have to divide chapters in chronological places. And so if I have something going on with Enoch and Simeon is somewhere else, you know, you can read a chapter about Enoch and then you read a chapter about Simeon so that you know what's going on with the two of them. And then Marcus, the centurion in charge of the of the Roman soldiers. At first, you think he is one nasty fellow, but as you go through the series, you find out he becomes a believer, and he actually retires from the Roman army, and his scout goes AWOL from the Roman army because he falls in love with a Christian girl and becomes a Christian. So, there's just all this drama that goes along with the action. And I've had people say, gosh, that's kind of a violent book. And it is. It is a violent time. But it has no vulgar language at all. I mean, a 15-year-old would be very comfortable reading it. There's no graphic sex scene or anything like that. So suitable for anybody from 15 up, I would say.
Right. And you made a good point there. It was a violent time.
It was.
We were not sending, nasty tweets or posting ugly pictures on Instagram. This was real hand-to-hand issues here. So
yes,
you're right. It was a very different time, but yet a time where we're still able to garner and glean some of the positivity out of the messages that people were able to share, simply because they endured such a time. So you're right about that. Now, for the person who's an aspiring author and they are wondering if they should pursue a career in writing, it's something that's really been pulling on their heart as of late. They think they have an inclination towards it. Do you have any suggestions or any tips for the person who really has their toe in the water about becoming an author?
Yes. Of course, I write fiction, and fiction has to be exciting and believable, by the way. And if you write science fiction, be very careful, because the science fiction readers will say, "Oh, that's impossible." Boop, they'll throw the book away. But if you write nonfiction, you better know what you're talking about too. So be an expert in your field if you can, and if you find that interesting and want to write a nonfiction, that's good too. One of the things that the publishers and everything want to know is this your only book? And they don't want to hear yes. They want to hear no. I'm going to write 3 or 4 more. They want to hear that, because if you're a writer, and especially if you want to make a living as a writer, you can't write one book. Don't count on that. Making a living. And the other thing is, learn the craft. Writing is a craft, just like many other things. It's an art, and there are performing arts, but this is an art in and of itself. It's not a performing art, but it's an art in and of itself, and it's work. You have to work at it a little bit. You can't have poor punctuation and impossible sentences and that kind of thing. So you need to learn. You need to learn about how to write.
Absolutely. Such good advice. And you're right. I think for some people they think, oh, well, I'll just write a sci-fi novel and it doesn't matter. I can be as fantastical as I would like. No, people are going to call foul. So you're right about that. Right about
Yeah, they will.
Yeah. And even if it's a short story the first time, it's a shorter book the first time, make sure that it's real. You gave some good advice there. I love it. Well, Ronald, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your books with us and for giving us such great advice. Before I let you go, though, please, could you remind everyone what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay, Bethlehem's Brothers is the title of the book, and you can get in contact with me at Ronald Hera Books, and Hera is spelled Hera, like the Greek goddess. Ronald Hera Books is my Facebook area, and You can get it at Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and pageturner.us is a website you can get it at. They're the ones that print the book.
Alrighty. Thank you again, Ronald Hera, for being on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today. And listeners, thank you for tuning in and spending time with us as well. It doesn't matter if you're listening via your radio or you're streaming us from Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We appreciate your listening in and making us a part of your routine. As always, may God's grace and mercy continue to shine down on you. And remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.